Stuck inside my mind in this quarantine pause. The light at the end of the tunnel isn't in sight. Where do I go to find someone to talk to about all of my flaws? Who can inevitably validate me, tell me the light. I searched until nothing I'm anxious and depressed and my coping skills are not fine. We weren't a fit and it felt like a waste of time. I heard an interview and I felt an instant connection. I learned CBT, BBT and mindfulness skills in each and every session. Now I'm pulling through, ready to ask the next question. The next question. The next question. The next question. The next question.
Hello and welcome to NextQuest podcast, where I ask your potential therapist questions so you don't have to. I am your host, Noah S. Garcia, licensed professional counselor supervisor. Today, I welcome to the show Dr. Sarah Cairns, licensed psychologist, who will be discussing her practice and area of specialty, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, or EMDR. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So interested in learning more today. So why don't we start with what are your credentials and experience?
Yeah, so I'm a licensed psychologist and I am a certified EMDR therapist and EMDR consultant. And when you say experience, what do you mean? What would you like me to share with you?
I mean, as in depth as you want to go, like, where did you do like practicums or internships or like what kinds of things have you focused on in your career?
Absolutely. So I did my undergrad at New Mexico State in women's studies. And I think it's not called women's studies anymore. I think it's called gender studies.
Yeah.
Now that we've moved towards that, which is really big positive, but
Yeah.
I'm old and that's what we did back then, which we know better now. We're doing better now. And then I moved to the Seattle area and did my master's and doctorate at Northwest University, which is a small college in Kirkland, right in the Seattle area. And then let's see, where did I do my experiences? I did my first practicum at community mental health, which anyone who's worked in community mental health knows is a lot.
Don't even get me started.
Right. I think if you haven't had an experience with community mental health as a professional, like, oof.
You're missing a whole skill set.
Oh, yeah.
I think,
I agree completely. And it's also, there's a lot of empathy just in understanding the clients that go to community mental health and also the barriers to care, the barriers to access, and just also like that whole area of our field, right? And like the burnout with therapists and being overloaded, and there's just so much there. So that's where I started, which I really feel blessed for that experience and saw all different kinds of clients there, just kind of whatever came in the door. And then I worked in a private practice, a group private practice that was focused predominantly on serving the needs of clients who couldn't afford services. And so I worked under a psychologist who basically set up a training center in private practice. It was all focused on education and allowing clients to pay what they could afford. And that was like set as they came into treatment, but some people paid $5. Some people, they had an arrangement where like they could bake cookies every 2 weeks and bring that to the group, and that was their payment, right? So everyone was very unique in that. And we had people who came in and paid $100. That's what they could afford. And that was a phenomenal experience. I saw all different kinds of people in that practice. And I also got to use EMDR a lot in that practice. actually the best supervisor, one of the best. I shouldn't say that, but like he definitely like steered me into the direction of being myself within therapy, which has been such a powerful experience. And then I did my final internship in school up at Western Washington University in their counseling center, and saw students who went to school there. And that was a really incredible experience, and very different because you do brief therapy typically. And so you'll see people for like 3 sessions, and, you know, maybe a handful of people you'll see for the whole year. And we did a lot of group therapy there, which was a new experience to me, really. And that was an incredible opportunity. And then I did my postdoc. So psychologists in Texas are required to do a 1-year postdoc post-graduation as provisionally licensed therapists. And I worked under Dr. Christy Sprouls in Austin. So I moved to Austin. And she is a well-known EMDR trainer and educator in EMDR. And I worked out of her practice, which was phenomenal because I only did EMDR. I only saw clients who were seeking EMDR, and I really got more immersed in this world, and, you know, assisting in small group facilitation at her trainings. I just can't say enough good things about that experience. It really has set up the opportunities that I have now and how I kind of envision like what my practice looks like. So that's kind of where I've been. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Lots of cool stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely. So your practice, you have your own practice, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's
Do
correct.
you practice, is the practice under your name, or is there an LLC name?
Yeah, so the practice is called Cairns Therapy and Nutrition, PLLC, and it's a group practice.
Okay, cool. So at your practice, do you accept insurance? If so, which ones? If not, why not?
I think that's a really good question. And I think there's probably a lot of different answers in our field. But at our practice, the therapist side, we do not accept insurance. Our nutritionist just started getting paneled and is taking United Insurance, which is really exciting. We don't accept insurance for a number of reasons. One, I feel like in some ways it limits access to care, because how do I want to put this? I want to like keep it PC, in my opinion, about insurance, right? Especially with all the things that have happened in the pandemic. I think they limit access to care because they only reimburse for certain diagnoses. Mm-hmm. And also it mandates oftentimes that you must give a diagnosis. And mm-hmm. if someone doesn't fit a diagnosis, they may not be granted reimbursement for care, mm-hmm. right? I also feel like it dictates the type of care that people get, the mm-hmm. duration of care, and it also is very pathologizing. Mm-hmm. So I don't work with insurance. I provide super bills, which I think a lot of therapists do, which is something that people can submit to their insurance companies. I do work with a lot of people that have, come to our group in discussing with their insurance providers kind of ways to potentially get out of network benefits because mm-hmm. of what we do here. It's very specialized and there aren't mm-hmm. a lot of providers, and insurance companies are typically required to be able to provide the services and the care that their clients need. And so it's kind of a loophole that some people can kind of get granted that. And so no, I don't do insurance. I think they also really minimize the amount that they pay therapists, and it increases burnout, mm-hmm. right? Because then clinicians have to see a higher number of clients in order to make their living. And then we're not providing as quality of care. So it's kind of like both sides, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's if you have out-of-network benefits. Some plans don't include out-of-network benefits. Mm-hmm. Do you ever contact insurance companies about working with them out of network, or is that something the client does?
So I have minimal experience working with insurance companies in general, but I will say that I feel like a really important part of my role in that process is to advocate for my client. Mm-hmm. And so if someone has insurance, I really like to open up that discussion and be a part of that team, right? In figuring out what that looks like for them, mm-hmm. right? And making sure that they can get the most out of the insurance company as far as supporting what they're trying to do, because insurance companies are kind of notorious for saying, I don't know, and passing you on to someone else and taking hours and hours of time, right?
Don't even get me started.
I know, even for super bills, like super bills getting denied because they don't have the right codes. We can't just call the insurance company and say, hey, what code do I need for telehealth that you're going to accept? They're like, I don't know, look it up online. Well, can't just do that typically. So,
well, the funny thing was with one insurance company at the beginning of the pandemic, they posted how to bill for telehealth online. And then after having like claims processed weirdly and stuff happen, I called and they're like, oh, well, you're supposed to bill this way. And I'm like, well, but this is how you were telling people to bill, and now you're saying this. So then I had to resubmit a whole bunch of claims, and then it took much longer to process. It was awful.
Yeah, it's a big runaround. And I think I'm crossing my fingers for everyone that like things have changed a little bit during the pandemic, and not necessarily in a good way, but we've seen things change. And I think it's come to light the problems with insurance more to a general awareness. And I'm hoping we see some change, because I think people want something different. They need something different.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that telehealth, for example, increases accessibility like 110%. You know, people who typically wouldn't have been able to go to therapy because of their work schedule now can go sit in their car on their lunch break and meet with their therapist. You know,
Absolutely.
like it's awesome. So do you have sliding scale given that you're mainly private pay?
Yeah, so I think that's a great follow-up question. So how we kind of offset that is everyone in our practice accepts reduced fee, right? And that just depends on what's available at the time. I will say that I have clients on my caseload that pay $40. I have a pro bono spot, right? That's very important to me. And our group to increase access to care and quality care. And I feel like on our end, like with the reduced fee, like kind of behind the curtain, right? Like those reduced fee spots are typically about or less than what the insurance company would reimburse for. And so, yeah, we, as part of our group, we require everyone to accept a certain number of reduced fee clients. Super important.
Yeah, no, I agree. Do you have weekend or evening appointments available?
Everyone in our practice sees people in the evening, at least, a few days a week, because again, increasing that access to care. A lot of people, they punch the clock from 9 to 5. It's changed a little bit with the pandemic and working from home, but if we can't provide services after that 5 o'clock hour, like a lot of people won't have access to care.
Right.
Personally, I have been known to work on the weekends. I do what's called marathon sessions with Emdr, and usually I reserve weekend spots for those types of sessions. But it just depends on the need. I typically don't work on Saturday or Sunday unless I'm doing like something pretty extensive, right? Like multi-hour sessions.
Gotcha. Okay. Is being a therapist your first career? If not, what was?
Do you want to guess what my first career was?
I don't know. You've got me there.
So I was a licensed cosmetologist.
Okay.
And I did hair for about 10 years.
Very cool.
Yeah. It was a fun career, like, right? The armchair psychologist job.
Yeah.
It was very fun. I liked it a lot. I would say I don't miss it, but I loved it when I did it.
Well, standing on your feet all day is hard.
It is hard. But I really liked that connection with people, right? Yeah. And also like hopefully making people feel good about themselves, making them see like, that beautiful piece of themselves, and being in that field, they call it being a day maker.
You should open up a practice where you do hair and therapy at the same time.
And when you botch someone's haircut, like, what is that bringing up for you? Do you feel like that's impacting our relationship right now? Where are you feeling that in your body?
I think that would have to be in the informed consent.
Yes.
And like a release of liability.
Yes.
But it would be a cool service.
Yeah, it would be a cool service. And I think a lot of people really feel safe and open up to their hairstylists and, you know, barbers and, you know, cosmetologists. And it's a really powerful, vulnerable field, right? So yeah, I loved it. I wouldn't go back, right? But it was wonderful. And then as I left that and finished up some school, I bartended for a little while and waitressed, which is again, right? Like another therapist role.
Yeah.
Different medium.
Right.
But that was fun too.
I mean, like, you know, I think any sort of customer service is like, I feel like there's a lot of crisis management,
100%.
You know, in customer service.
Like diffusing, regulation. Yes. Like, how do I calm you down so we can be in your thinking brain so we can have a conversation about what's going on? Right? Yeah. Always holding space. Just creating that. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So is that what led you to being a therapist, or was there something else that drew you to it?
Yeah. So all through my academics, I did hair. Like, it really put me through all of my college, that and like a dabbling in the restaurant industry. But what happened for me is I went into women's studies and I started volunteering at this place called Stepping Stones at Families and Youth Incorporated, which is no longer there, in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which, if you know where that is, it's the second biggest city in New Mexico, but it's like tiny. And I worked in a residential girls' home, and a lot of the adolescents had been taken from their families, were parts of the foster system, just really lived in these really, like, were coming from like these really awful situations. And my role there was very limited. It was essentially like, make sure they had food, drive them to school, you know, make sure they get up on time, and like, that was kind of it. Like, make sure they're all alive. And one of the things that I saw while I was working there is that, like, none of the people who worked there, and I get that it's limited, we all made minimum wage, right? So there's barriers there too, to like investing into it. I get that. But no one wanted to like let these girls outside of the house. There were no activities. These girls were sitting around. Awful. It was terrible. It's heartbreaking.
What are they supposed to do? You're going to get like behavior stuff up the butt, you know, like.
No kidding. Yeah, it was awful. And you just watch these kiddos like deteriorate, right? Yeah. It's like they come in from a bad situation and now the chaos is gone.
Right.
And they're just sitting, right? And so you're watching this depression manifest. You're watching them like not connect with people. You're watching all of these things happen. And so what I started to do is I got permission to start like kind of an activities program. And it started as a gardening program because they had like a lot of land there, and they actually had kind of a garden space. And so like with the kiddos, we created like a program where we were going to raise our own funds because there was no funding. And so we got a lot of funding from the community, right? And donations from people, all kinds of people, for this garden. And I would come in when I wasn't working and we would facilitate creating this garden, right? We got like sprinkler systems donated, trees, all kinds of stuff, and really just kind of started cultivating this. And then the other things that started getting cultivated there more when I was like, you know, working, were like, okay, how do we orchestrate taking them out on like a hike or a walk or like moving around or like going to the movies or like, and so we started to create these things. And it was wonderful to see these people just, you know, have like a glimmer of hope, and like they're working towards something, they're seeing things happen, and they're creating that change. But the biggest thing, so this is where it kind of transitions into how did I get where I am, is I kept running up against like barriers. Like, well, what does the therapist say? well,
gosh.
what does Dr. So-and-so think about that? And I'm like, well, fuck y'all. I'm going to go and like, I'm going to go into this field so that I can decide what I'm going to do because you're not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is not how this should look. Like you're hurting these people, keeping them in a cage. And so I essentially was like, okay, what do I do? And so I applied to two master's programs. And one of the programs called me back and said, yeah, we don't really want you for this master's program. We would really like you for our doctorate. Like you like kind of check all these boxes. And I was like, oh my God, like that's a really big commitment. That's like 5 years. I feel like I get bored of things in like 9 months if I'm lucky. How am I gonna...
pregnancy only lasts that long?
Oh my gosh, right? No kidding.
Not to say the word only. I mean that that sounds like a long time. Sorry, I got you.
Totally, I know. That's kind of a funny marker, 9 months. But I was like, I really had to check myself, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. And so that's how I ended up where I was, or where I am in that where I was in that program, being in the doctorate program. And I really thought I wanted to work in community mental health, enter in that first experience.
We all do.
We all did. We all thought that was the way to save the world. That's what we thought. And totally. And I thought I wanted to work with youth. Like I thought that was what I wanted. And when I went into community mental health, I realized that like that was actually not fitting my ideal. It was actually, I was running up to the same barriers. Mm-hmm. But now it's like, our funding doesn't let us do that, right? It's always that barrier. And so when I went to that second site that I talked about with not private practice and saw that like, quality services, education, like we're really looking at providing like outstanding services and fitting the needs of the community. Like that's really where I was like, this is home. This is home to me. Like, this is where I want to be. And that's how I really got kind of where I wanted to go. And so I think like, it's, not a super like succinct elevator story, but I feel like that's how I ended up here, honestly, is like those girls. And I can tell you the names of like every girl who came through that door still.
I love it. I think it's a great origin story. Like superheroes, how they have origin stories. That's your origin story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking me.
So tell us more about yourself, like hobbies, interests, TV shows you're into, music, pets, kids, etc.
Okay. Let's see. So my favorite TV show is Supernatural, which I don't know if you've seen it, but it just ended. And
that's been on for a while, hasn't it?
It's on for 15 seasons. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And it's definitely my favorite show. And now kind of, I think, when it ended, I will not lie. I heard a spoiler. I will not share the spoiler, but I did not want to watch that last episode and it wrecked me. Wrecked my world. I already knew what happened, knew it was going to wreck my world. Wrecked my world anyway. But I really think like as I got older, because it's been on for 15 years, right? So I was 20 when it came out. And now when I look back on it, I identify that as like a metaphor for trauma therapy, right? Like the hunters, they're hunting things that other people don't see, right? Like other people, only certain people know are real and have been super impacted by. And I feel like that's a trauma therapist too. Like people come in with these like horrific things that they feel or know that other people haven't experienced. And with EMDR, we begin that healing process so that it can be something that they experienced and not something that they're experiencing anymore. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that show is like even more powerful now, thinking about that metaphor.
That's cool,
than it was before. It was just like, oh my gosh, Dean Winchester's hot. But I've transitioned out of that phase of objectivity in my life. So let's see. So TV shows, I think my biggest thing, and like I'm sure the clients that I work with will be like, oh yeah, she talks about this all the time. Like I love superheroes. Like I love the idea that there are people out there who want to help people. Like they just, they have these gifts, right? And they want to use those to better society. They want to selflessly help other people, and they have the capability to do that. And they also have their own story outside of that. And I think that to me is just amazing. And I think it's very empowering that each of us can have a little bit of that in us, even though most of us can't fly. But, I just think that's so empowering and so fun to think about. Let's see. Hobbies. I recently got into horses, which is something that I used to do as a child. And during the pandemic, we were really trying to cultivate, like, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to stay sane? I think we all struggle with that a little bit. And how are we going to stay connected? And how are we going to have a life? And so, I used to be involved with horses when I was very young, and it seemed something that was like, it was social distanced, it was outside, it was something that could take up, time and be an investment. And I actually bought my first horse this last year, which was a huge deal. Thank you so much.
I imagine it's kind of like buying a car.
With a lot of personality, right? Yeah, and it literally felt like my inner 7-year-old was finally at peace.
Oh.
It was like this amazing experience. So my horse's name is Grace. And I always use this phrase in my work, have grace with yourself today. Right? And so for me, when we were actually going to name the horse after a female scientist, I don't remember what her name was, but when I saw Grace, I was like, that's it. That's the name. Like this fits. And she's been just really like a godsend for me, and for being able to take care of myself in my work and in the pandemic. And so I have started taking natural lifemanship, which is a trauma-focused equine assisted psychotherapy. And so we're hoping to bring that into our practice, maybe not soon, but maybe like in a year or so when we're a little more comfortable. But you'll see this theme with me. But like, I found out that there's legitimately EMDR that can be done on horses. And I was like, holy shit, hold the phone. Like, can I do this? Like this, I can marry these two things. Oh, like
goat yoga.
Oh my gosh. Yes, totally. But so that's become like a really big part of my life and my family's life. You asked about like kids and you actually met my daughter. I have a 5.5-year-old daughter. Her name is Olivia. She was named after Olivia Benson from SVU.
Oh my goodness.
Crush.
Love
yes. She's talking about superhumans, right?
Yeah. Your 7-year-old self was satisfied with a horse. My 7-year-old self will only ever be satisfied with a dirt bike.
Do you have the dirt bike yet?
No. I've always wanted one, but I never did it. And I feel like I'm at a point in my life now where my bones might break if I try and do the things that I wanted to do.
I hear that. Yeah. Oh man. I hear that. Isn't it funny? But what about a motorcycle? Is that not the same?
What did do it for me for a little while is I'm too skitsy of motorcycles. My grandfather was a surgeon, and all my family are medical professionals. And, I've just heard horror stories my whole life. But I did get a jet ski. I had a jet ski for a few years, and that's like a water motorcycle.
Okay.
And that was
Does it hurt
fun.
less when you hit the water?
I never had a big like fly off. Luckily, I used to take it out. I would generally only take it out. I would take it out on Lake Travis, but like first thing in the morning when the water's like glass, and like all the big boats haven't been out all day making it all. Because Lake Travis can get really choppy.
Isn't that where the boats sank during like the Trump rally?
Yes.
Because they got a little too choppy and have a little foresight there.
Okay.
And no one was
Anyway.
hurt. We can think that's funny because no one was hurt.
Right.
Okay.
So switching gears, I'm excited to learn more about EMDR.
Oh yeah, let's talk about EMDR.
So pretend that I'm a client who is in your virtual office, and I've heard of EMDR, but have no idea what it is, except my friend told me it could probably help. What would you say to orient me to this approach and gain informed consent?
Okay, so would you like the full explanation?
Yeah, like give me all the good stuff. I want to know.
Yeah, all the good stuff. Okay. So I typically start by giving a little bit of an explanation of what trauma is. And I realize that some people don't identify their experiences as trauma. And that's a big part of trauma work, right? A lot of people don't want to think that they have gone through that or don't identify as having gone through that. And so one of the key pieces I think to describing EMDR is to understand what that is. So I will often start by saying, there's two types of trauma. As we think of it, there's what's called objective trauma. And that's something that you and I and most people would agree would be, very life-changing experience, like being in war, being assaulted, being in a horrific car accident, right? Where most people would agree that that's going to have some major impact. And then there's what's called subjective trauma. And those are things that may impact people very differently. Right. And oftentimes it's not just one event. It can be many events that are insidious and are over time. For example, like maybe a relationship that we had since childhood that isn't healthy. And so we're not pinpointing one experience. It's many experiences, but it's helped shape the way we are and how we view the world. And the thing about objective and subjective trauma is your brain doesn't care. It doesn't make a differentiation like we do, right? It's all stored in your body and your brain the same way. And the trick with trauma is it's stored in a different place in your brain in a different way than the other experiences that you've been through. So I think of it kind of like, if you think of trauma as like a rock, right? It's not going to be digested by your brain. And so it stays in its true form, right? So when we think about those experiences, oftentimes we're tapping into them exactly how they happened, right? We're having very vivid images, right? Very distinct thoughts and beliefs, very strong emotions, maybe the same emotions that you experienced when you went through that. Bring that up, like your chest clenches or your jaw tightens or your back starts to hurt, right? Or many other body sensations, right? And so it's very much stored in this capsulated way almost, right? And I think of it like if that's one piece of trauma and then we have many, it's like now we're creating this rock formation, right? And oftentimes what happens is if one of those pieces gets triggered, it lights up all of the networks of trauma, right? And so that's why when we get triggered, we often have a larger reaction than what just happened because we are reacting to all of the trauma versus what just happened or that one piece of trauma that it's connected to, right? So all of that being said, what we think happens in REM sleep is that the events of the day are essentially processed or digested and integrated with the rest of the information in our brain. So like when that happens, you can think of things like if you've ever gotten in maybe like an argument or maybe scratch that. If you maybe got into something if you had like something that you wanted to say to someone and you were maybe like very upset, right? And you decided, I'm going to sleep on it, right? And you wake up in the morning and you're like, whew, I didn't say anything. Feel a lot better today, right? Have you ever had that kind of experience?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What they believe happens is the events of your day are integrating into the other information in your brain, right? Okay. So then when you think back on these kind of integrated pieces of information and experiences, you can remember them, but you're not viscerally feeling them, right? Like you could probably tell me what happened yesterday, but as long as nothing bad happened, right? Like, right, nothing traumatic, we're assuming. You might be able to recount those events and it feels kind of mundane. It's like, okay, like I got up, I walked my dog, I had, some breakfast, and like, I had a long day at work and I came home and went to bed, like, right? But what happens is with those trauma memories and those experiences is they're not integrating with that information, right? They're stored in their original form. And so the goal of EMDR is to allow those trauma experiences to integrate with the rest of the information in your brain. So they call that adaptive information processing, right? So we're kind of integrating those two things. And how they do that is through bilateral stimulation, or BLS. We love our alphabet soup. And that's what happens in REM sleep, right? Rapid eye movement, more alphabet soup. And your eyes are essentially going right, left, across the midline of your brain, right? And they believe that that's the mechanism that creates this processing, right? And so that's the same mechanism we use in EMDR to integrate that information. And we do it in many different ways. So, eye movements happen in REM sleep, and we can use eye movements with EMDR. We can use tapping, like the butterfly hug. A lot of people are familiar with that, or tapping on your legs. We also can do tones that go back and forth. Those are the standard forms of bilateral stimulation that are used. But there are also other forms of bilateral stimulation. Like if you think about just moving in daily life, like walking, you're moving, right, left, you're creating that bilateral stimulation, running, any kind of, exercise typically. And there's all kinds of things we can do. Like when we work with kids, like sprinting, like, okay, we can do the same process and you can do sprints, right? I know there's some people use like pool noodles, like tapping back and forth with kiddos. I don't typically treat a lot of children, and so that's not going to give a bunch of examples and kind of botch the great work that EMDR specialists with kids are doing. And so how we access these memories is in a very specific protocoled way, right? So that idea is that we're accessing the specific pieces that we're wanting to look for. The other piece that I like people to know, and maybe not all in one go, right? Because this is a lot of information oftentimes to digest, is that EMDR works with the past, the present, and the future, because we believe the past informs the present, right? So the trauma or the experiences of the past are informing whatever someone is coming in for today, right? Okay, I'm hypervigilant, I have high anxiety, whatever those kind of presenting concerns look like, right? So then we're going to work with that presenting concern, whatever's left when we're done with the past. And then we're also working with how do they want to be feeling, acting, and behaving in the future. Right?
So what is the process? I think from the brief research I have done, it sounds like there's like different phases, or like a certain, like a specific protocol. Can you give us just like a quick and dirty kind of idea of what that looks like?
Yeah, so EMDR is an eight-phase protocol, right? And so oftentimes people think of EMDR as like just the bilateral stimulation, right? And so oftentimes we'll hear that like, oh, I did EMDR. Well, it's an entire therapy, right? With those 8 phases. So the first phase is, history taking and treatment planning. And so that might be what we think of as like more of like the intake, understanding like what this person's been through, what their life looks like, what their social connections look like, right? And so really kind of understanding like what's going on, like what this person has been through, what their life looks like now, what supports and resources they have, right? And then creating a treatment plan. And that treatment plan is created in a really specific way, with that past, present, future in mind, right? So we want to identify the things that we want to work on. And then the second phase is what's called preparation. And preparation is really making sure that someone is in a space where they can reprocess, right? Like the bilateral stimulation is going to be appropriate for them, right? And so sometimes what happens is this phase may take 1 session. This phase may take a year, depending on the client, right? And so some people need a lot of coping skills. Some people don't have a lot of internal resources to make it safe to really look at that trauma. And so building that up, all different kinds of things can happen in this phase. And then we also set up, when the client is ready, we'll set up like that bilateral stimulation. And we do typically like a positive resource. A lot of therapists use like the Calm Safe Place. There's variations on that name. And that's essentially developing a tool and pairing it with the bilateral stimulation. And that happens for a couple of reasons. One, it allows us to give the client a resource to self-soothe, emotionally regulate outside of session, and potentially to use inside of session, right? But also so that they can feel what the bilateral stimulation feels like with something, see how their brain reacts and how it moves with something positive before we open up, all of that negative in an intentional and purposeful way, right? So that preparation phase is very important. And then we move into what is typically and stereotypically thought of as like EMDR. We move into the assessment phase where we're looking specifically at the experience that we're going to reprocess. We assess that. There's a protocol way to do that. So we're accessing that memory and experience in a specific way. And then phase 4 is desensitization, which is where you start, doing the bilateral stimulation with that experience, right? And this is oftentimes this is the phase that's often thought of as like EMDR specifically. And then the next phase is the positive installation, right? Like oftentimes we have negative belief systems associated with experiences that we've had. And so, installing and cultivating things that are more positive and adaptive is part of that process. And then we have the body scan, which is phase 6. And then phase 7 is closure. And so that's like closure of the session. And that can happen, depending on where you end the session, right? And then phase 8 is reevaluation. So reevaluating the work that you have done and you do this throughout the process. And oftentimes people think of EMDR as like a linear thing, right? So we're going to do our history, we're going to do our preparation, we're going to do our, the work on the memory, and then we're going to just keep working on memories. Well, it's more fluid than that, right? Because you may come into something where someone doesn't have the tools to navigate whatever situation's happening, or maybe you're working on a memory and you realize, oh, information needs to happen here because we literally don't have the information to make this adaptive, right? It's just maybe a lack of knowledge, no one's fault, right? Then we're moving back into preparation. Right? And so it is a very fluid process. And I think that that's really important because a lot of times people will come to EMDR therapy and they're not doing bilateral stimulation, so they feel like they're not doing EMDR, and that's not necessarily what's happening, right? And hopefully their therapist is explaining that to them and being very intentional about, explaining where they are in the process, which can be very helpful.
Cool.
Did that help? Did that answer that question?
Yeah, no, it totally answered that question. So thinking about everything you just described, in what populations or issues might EMDR not be an appropriate approach? So, for example, it can be really difficult for trans and non-binary folks to engage in body scans in a way that may be productive. So what are your thoughts on this, and what would your approach be to a trans client who is unable to engage in body scans as part of the process?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So there's 2 questions there, right? So the first question is, who is it inappropriate for? And I'm like, my reductionistic explanation of this answer to this is going to be, it's appropriate for everybody, right? It's just a matter of where what you're going to do with it, right? Maybe someone will be in preparation for a long time. Like we see that a lot with clients who are highly dissociative, right? There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen before they can engage in that bilateral stimulation in an effective way. Right. And so you might be in that preparation phase longer. And then I think that that's a really important question about that body scan. And I would also extend that it's not just trans folks, though I can with the body scan, but I work a lot with like food and weight and body issues specifically. And so that is a major consideration with that too. And I think part of this is about being intentional, right? And knowing your client and knowing what's going to be okay with them, right? And so some of the things that might happen with someone who maybe is trans would be, and this is not my specialty area, so I'm really being intentional to use my language appropriately. So please correct me if I'm wrong. I would like to be corrected if I use like verbiage inappropriately. So my understanding, and I've heard of this talked about, and I don't necessarily know that I have worked with a trans client specifically, but there are oftentimes certain areas of the body that are very triggering. Right. And so what you might do is you might guide the body scan more intentionally instead of being like, start with your head, working all the way down to your toes. You might say something like, okay, so if we check in with your back, right? And guiding versus allowing like free association with that and avoiding those areas that are going to bring up things that maybe you're not working on right now. Right. So as to not also bring up work that maybe you're also going to do later on down the road, because you want to be able to stay focused on also what you're working on. And if we open a lot of trauma at one time in a body scan, the body typically carries the most amount of trauma, right? And so that could really be a very painful experience if we do that in an unintentional way. And I really believe that one of the biggest tenets of EMDR is collaboration. And so if I was working with a trans client, right, and I knew that was something that felt, possibly unsafe, or maybe I know it's explicitly unsafe, I'm going to have a conversation before I'm ever like, hey, let's go to phase 6, right? And I'd probably check in before we even do that. Like, the next stage is the body scan. Like, how are you feeling about that? Like, is that something that you feel like we could check in with certain parts? Are there parts that feel like they would be off limits? Right. And I'm not.
Yeah, because I imagine, that's different for everybody. Some people may experience gender dysphoria about their hands, for example.
Totally.
So making an assumption that it's just certain areas of the body, I think, is short-sighted. So I like what you're saying by going over that, like what feels safe, what doesn't, and really ultimately getting consent to proceed with that.
Absolutely.
Got it. Yeah,
and I would love to hear your thoughts on that too, right? Like, what do you like? What do you feel like would be an appropriate way to address that body scan?
Well, I think that it's all about communication. I think that, if I were to do EMDR, I would expect that it would be a conversation, for example. Like, as you know, this show is largely based on the idea of consent, with the whole NextQuestion aspect of things. So for me, consent is very important when it comes to that, because some people, it may be a straight up no.
Yeah.
And I think that proceeding without taking that into consideration could do a lot of harm.
I agree completely.
So I think just a conversation is the best way to approach it. And there's a lot of differing opinions in the trans community. I do follow this about EMDR. There's a lot of conversation about it. Some people say it's a straight up no, never do it. Some people say, adapt it. Like maybe somebody just focuses on their toes, they don't have to focus on anything else, So that's, I feel like saying no is all or nothing. And then doesn't give an individual an opportunity to say you know what, I want to try it. So I like to know my options, and I like for people to ask me before they do things.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So
absolutely.
That's my thoughts on it.
And I feel like there, EMDR is a protocoled approach. And I think it's really important. I'm going to say this because I'm an EMDR consultant. It's very important for people to understand the protocol and stick to the protocol, especially as they're learning. And there is a lot of creativity that can go into it if you understand how it all works, right?
The principles, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that body scan is something that, this has to be taken into consideration, because if we say, well, we can't move on if we don't do that body scan, like
Right.
we're literally excluding like groups of people who can't do that. Right. And there is a lot of benefit that can come. Say they have trauma stored in their body, right? Which I'm going to say, if we're having a hard time doing a body scan, there's some sort of trauma in the body, right?
Well, I mean, what about issues like chronic pain though?
Oh, totally. Well, we work with chronic pain with the Emdr a lot. We do a lot of that chronic pain. And the body scan can be a very hard part of that. Right. But then again, it's all about consent, right? Especially with that. And like knowing the limits. Like one of the things that's really important in EMDR, we do this in the preparation phase, is like a stop sign, right? And it's really, I always say it's really easy for me to like sit over here and like ask you to continue. I can be the most empathetic person in the entire world, very attuned, and I'm never going to feel what you're feeling, literally, right? And so partnering with that person, it's not like you are doing this and we're walking through this protocol approach. It's like, man, this is your journey and I'm just helping facilitate it, right? And so I have to have that consent all the time. It's powerful. It's a really important question.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, and I would love to see, I don't know, like some research or something on it. But what, you mentioned that you do EMDR. Is it for chronic pain, or is it just working with people who have chronic pain? Like, can EMDR help with chronic pain, for example?
Yes. And if you want to know more about the chronic pain, Mark Grant is the person who's done like all of the, or I shouldn't say all. He is the person that's most well known, I believe, in pain with EMDR.
Cool. So I know you said EMDR can help everyone, but what sorts of presenting issues do you commonly see, and maybe like what's something that is less common but EMDR can help with? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think like for me personally, like what I commonly see, I work with a lot of PTSD. And I work, you see a lot of anxiety, right? Depression, right? I work with a lot of eating disorders and disordered eating and food. I call it food, weight, and body concerns. I feel like eating disorders is very like exclusionary. And I think that that's been a very helpful piece of our work. I'm trying to think off the top of my head other presenting concerns, because I feel like when I work with trauma, a lot of it I see in a lens of that trauma, which kind of, it's more symptom based. And I don't do a lot of specific diagnosing unless I have to, because I think it can be positive and negative. I know there's a big debate about that. And so I usually discuss that with my clients, what's important to them. But let's see.
What about OCD?
OCD, great treatment. I've worked a lot with trichotillomania with this, excoriation. There's a lot of research on OCD and this. And it's, there are some specific protocols for that, right? A lot of panic disorders. Phobias are another big one that's worked with EMDR quite. A lot of interpersonal relationship issues, which I know is kind of an ominous, like that's not diagnosis, but all different kinds of things.
It is and it
isn't, right? But that's a big one that I see. Or like emotional regulation, like however you want to put that into a diagnosis, but like that's a huge one that comes up a lot. Attachment issues, right? Again, back to the relational piece, right? We know that a lot of that comes from early childhood trauma. Psychosis is something. Okay, so this is the one that probably you wouldn't commonly think of.
Okay.
But psychosis is treated, and it's a very specialty area. There isn't to use it. I I have used it with schizoaffective and psychotic episodes before. I would not promote myself as that as like a specialty area of mine, because that's also like very acute things that are going on.
Yeah.
But I have done that. I've seen it be very effective in helping with stabilization and maintenance. Right.
Cool.
A lot of dissociation, like DID.
Yeah.
Right. That's a big one.
Integration really is what the key is there.
Yeah. And that's a really specialty area in Emdr as well. I'm trying to think of anything else that's popping up on the top of my head. Fear is a big one too, right? Kind of phobias, but like anticipatory things or grief and loss.
Wow. So really everything.
Really everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there one thing that it has like been shown that there's like a no, like don't do EMDR for this?
I'm sure I'm going to say no, and then someone's going to be like, "Hey, Dr. Cairns, like, blah, 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 blah." I'm going to say no, but I'm also going to say that that's a reductionistic answer. And oftentimes there's a lot of like with the populations where maybe it's a no, there might be additional work. There are certain things like seizures, like if people have seizures.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So I was thinking more diagnostically, but like seizures can be a thing. And so you're going to want to collaborate with someone's doctor on that. I don't know. I'm going to say, I don't know if the tones or the more tactile approaches to bilateral stimulation might affect that differently. I don't have a lot of experience with that. I have heard, people in like pregnancy, sometimes that has historically been like a consult the doctor. And that is not my specialty area. Perinatal and, postpartum is a very specialized area. But my understanding is that part of that concern is more like how distressed is the mother going to become?
Right. Yeah.
And I have worked with women who are pregnant, and I have not at this point had a doctor say no, but I always refer back to that medical professional because I don't know. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Very, very interesting.
So everyone can do EMDR.
Had to throw that out there.
For everybody.
So what is required for one to earn a certification in EMDR?
Yeah, so there's kind of different levels of training. So there's like EMDR basic training, and the basic training is typically like 2 weekends, 2 very full weekends. I think it's 50 hours. I'm open to being corrected on that exact number, but it's typically is 2 3-day weekends. And then you do 10 hours of consultation during that time period, and then you are basic trained.
Cool.
And then to pursue certification, someone has to be a fully licensed clinician. They have to do 20 hours of consultation. 10 of that has to be individual and 10 of it can be group. And they have to demonstrate a proficiency in the standard protocol, which is, really important. And then they have to do a little bit of ongoing education. I think it's like 14 CEUs. It's either 12 or 14. And then they have to provide like letters of recommendation from like their consultant, their EMDR consultant, and like other members of the therapeutic community. And I think that's it. And that's a lot. Like, right?
That's a lot.
That is a lot. I shouldn't say that's it. It takes a long time to do that, right? Oh, and they have to see a certain number of clients. There's a requirement of like number of clients and number of sessions that have to be done for that. And then when you become a consultant, you have to, it's a very similar process, but you're working with a consultant on your consulting, right? So it's more focused on like providing consultation effectively and demonstrating like your knowledge of like how it works in that more hands-on way with other people. And you need, I think it's 20 hours for that as well. But then you have to have, I think it's twice as many clients and twice as many hours independent of your certification. This is on top of your certification. And then additional continuing education hours, right? And then again with the recommendations, the letters of recommendation. And that can sometimes be a lot because you have to be doing that consulting. So there's also like building that, consultation part of your practice, or working with your consultant to do like group consulting. I know I did a couple of my hours, like being the consultant in a group that my consultant is running. And so like I'm providing answers, but also she's like there for backup, right? To also answer questions.
Yeah.
And that was a really cool experience.
That is cool.
There's a lot that goes into it. And there's a lot of like specialty trainings on top of like, being certified or a consultant. And then the next step is like a trainer, which they've actually suspended that, taking on any new trainer applications during the pandemic, because they're kind of adjusting, like moving to video training where they had never allowed that before. Right? It had all been in person. And so I think they're figuring out how they're going to do that, but that's the next step. But then there's also a lot of trainings and specialty stuff. Like, I know one that's big is like, groups, like doing Emdr with groups trauma, or like ongoing trauma, like when people are living in trauma, right? And how do we give someone resources to be able to be, resilient and persevere as the trauma is continuing,
right?
And like lots of specialty stuff, like we just talked about, like all those areas, right? OCD, phobias.
Yeah. I can imagine there's a specialist for each one.
Oh, I'm sure, absolutely. We can't be specialists in everything, right?
I know, it's a shame.
I know.
So what have you found are some common misconceptions people have about EMDR?
Am I awake when it happens?
That's a good one.
That's a good one. Is it hypnosis? Another misconception is that it's just the eye movements, right? Like you're going to walk in and we're going to quote do EMDR. Right? It's like, why are we not doing EMDR? That's a big one. Or like if we're not doing bilateral stimulation, we're not doing work.
Right.
That's a misconception. This is a big one. And I don't know where this came from, but I would like to have a conversation with the person who put this out there. EMDR takes 8 sessions.
Oh gosh.
I get that all the time. You can Google it and it says that. And I'm like, what asshat put this into the world? And the only thing I can think of is that someone at some point said the average time to work on a specific experience is 8, which I don't even believe that's true, but that's the only thing I can conceptualize that might be where that came from. But I hear that a lot, like way more often than I'd like.
Interesting.
Oh, I'm trying to think what else. I think another misconception is like the memory will go away, or they'll forget it, right? I'm trying to think of any other ones that I've heard, because there are a lot of them.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, there's a lot of them about therapy, period.
For sure. Have you heard any? Like, have you heard any things that like we haven't talked about that sound like wonderfully outrageous?
I'm trying to think of something, and I can't think of anything. Like I had said earlier, it's just kind of always been this nebulous concept to me, but it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I can't think of anything. Well, what kind of experience do you have working with particularly vulnerable clients, such as those who are transgender, undocumented, or BIPOC, to name a few examples?
Okay, so to be honest, I don't think I have any experience working with transgender folks, to my knowledge, right?
Well, to your knowledge, that's right.
To my knowledge. And Also, being undocumented, I don't know that I have necessarily worked with that population either. I will say when I worked at Western Washington University, they are, there's a specific word for this, please help me, a safe haven. Is that what it's called?
Okay.
Where they specifically do not report if they know things about documentation status. So that was a big piece of our work there. And we were trained very extensively on that as our school being a safe space. But to my knowledge, I did not work with anyone who was undocumented while I was there, or to my knowledge, anyone that I have worked with.
I mean, it sounds like you've worked with severe and chronic mental illness. You know, that's definitely a vulnerable population.
Definitely a vulnerable population. As far as BIPOC, I kind of hemmed and hawed about whether or not to share this story, but I think it's kind of important to be just kind of like vulnerable and honest. But I had a very specific client who brought this. They were going through a lot of, I shouldn't say they were going through, but they have experienced and continue to experience a lot of discrimination, racism, a lot of micro and macro aggressions, and you know, race was a really big part of our work together. And this person had asked me if I had ever worked with someone who was not white, and I responded that I had not, and I sat with that for a long time. And I realized my own short-sightedness and my own just ignorance and white privilege, right? That wasn't true. And I had actually worked with a lot of people who were not white. And that moment was so incredibly powerful for me. And I went and did a lot of work on myself with that. And I do work with a lot of people who are BIPOC. And that is something that I bring into the room, right? That I am a privileged white woman, right? And, you know, I want to know what they're like, just off the bat, like, this is a thing, right? Like, how do you feel about taking this journey with me? And not about me. It's not about me. It's about how they are experiencing that. And that moment was just so powerful for me that I could even have that belief that I hadn't, that it really just shook me. And this was also, I will say, like, this happened well before this year. And so going through this last year too, having checked a lot of that and then having that rechecked and, you know, really digging into that with myself and my own experience has been continually powerful. And my hope is that, not that anyone's like, oh, poor fucking white lady, and she doesn't know that she works with BIPOC people, but that I can be better for the people that I serve, because their journey is what matters. And if I'm not bringing that into the room, like, I am not allowing them to, you know, really search their whole self. And that's my responsibility as a clinician, to bring those things up. Even if even if someone says that's not an issue or that's not a thing, right? I can't expect someone else to bring anything up in therapy, right? Like, we have the shovel oftentimes. And so, yeah, I mean, I got a really big reality check there. And
I mean, that work to me is a lifetime process.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And we all, I mean, as therapists, it's imperative that we do it.
Absolutely. And I will say, like, it was not this person's job to teach me anything. Right. And we did not, and I went and did a lot of that, of beginning that work, right? It's ongoing. But my intention is to never have that be my short-sightedness again.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So earlier you kind of gave us the spiel about EMDR and what it is really. So in an initial session with a client, I assume that you would kind of discuss some of the logistics of EMDR and what else? What does it look like?
Well, it looks like someone's sitting on a couch and I'm sitting in my chair. And is that what you mean? Like literally what does it look like?
Yeah, well, like what, like a lot of people have a lot of anxiety about their initial appointments, right? So I guess my goal is to demystify what that would look like with you. That way, when somebody comes in, they'd already have an idea of what to expect.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. I was kind of trying to be funny with the, like, they're sitting on the couch, but literally I think, okay, so EMDR, people don't know what to expect. We just talked a little bit about those myths, right?
Yeah.
But it looks very similar to a regular therapy session, right? Like, I'll show you my office. It doesn't look any different than anybody else's office. I have a couch. I have, my therapy chair.
A lot of wood paneling.
And a lot of wood paneling over there, right? Lots of windows in this office. And typically the client will sit on the couch and I'll sit in my chair, and I have a little machine that I use. And the machine has these little 1980s headphones that I'm actually wearing right now, right on them for the tones. And we have like these little, I call them tappers. Other people call them buzzers or pulsers. And they're just like little like rectangles essentially that you would hold in the palms of your hands. And they vibrate just a little, like if you can imagine like feeling a cat purring, right? Mm-hmm. That's what they would feel like, or a hummingbird if you're not a cat person, right? In your hand, like just like that like light vibration, right? And we're only going to use that when we're doing like certain phases, right? Like when we're doing that bilateral stimulation. And so I'm assuming like the different part is when we are doing that bilateral stimulation. And so a client may, choose to close their eyes. They may leave them open. We go through a lot of that and what feels safe and comfortable to the client during these sessions. And, they're going to be having this experience, and we're going to be, starting and stopping the machine and checking in on what they're experiencing, and then continuing with that process. But I think it doesn't necessarily really like look different than any other kind of therapy, right? We're going to make sure that we have that rapport built. And like when they come in for the intake, we're just going to be talking, right? I know in my intake sessions, I typically talk to people about EMDR before they ever come into the office and answer whatever kind of questions they have about EMDR specifically, because I don't take clients that aren't interested in EMDR. So I want to make sure that everyone feels at least like somewhat comfortable coming in about the process. And I think that's a big one. Like a lot of people, I said like, being asleep or being hypnotized or something like that. That is a big thing. Like when we're talking about like what it looks like, a lot of people are like, am I going to be awake? Like, or am I going to lay on this couch and like, what's going to happen to me? And it's like, no, you're going to be sitting up or laying. If you want to lay down, you can. My couch is big enough. Right. There's a reason. Right. And so it looks a lot like that. And there's a lot of safety in the relationship before we're ever going into the trauma piece. Right. A lot of consent. I think that's really an important way to put it.
Cool. Okay. How would you say your clients would describe or experience you?
I think that they would say that I am maybe empathetic and funny, but also like have a pretty serious side too. Like and the serious side, I think that they would say is like, I'm really invested in them getting where they want to go. And so I tend to like refocus, right? But I definitely think that like humor is such an important part of therapy, as appropriate, right? There are inappropriate times for humor too. But I think that that's a big part of it with me and working with me as well, right? I'm a little serious, I'm a little sassy. I like to swear a lot, not gonna lie. It's a true thing. I
bet you'll have people contact you just on that basis.
Yeah, I say fuck a lot and no one will believe me, but I do not swear at home. period.
Yeah. Like it just turns off?
It kind of just turns off, but I have made an intentional decision that like I didn't want my daughter to necessarily have like an inherent swearing issue. And so if I said fuck around my daughter, she'd be like, what does that mean? I mean, she wouldn't know, right? It'd be so confusing.
Yeah.
So probably, yeah, right. And I would say that most of my clients would identify that I'm also like, I have a plan, right? So like we have an intention coming into the sessions, which I think with trauma is really important, right?
Yes.
Predictability, consistency is really important. And so like, I have an idea, we set an idea before we even come into the next session of what to expect. Even if, you know, therapy's improv sometimes, things come up, but they know what like the intention is, right? Like if we're going to work on a big piece of work, like I don't want them to come in and be like, okay, now we're going to work on that like worst thing you've ever been through. And they're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. Like that is really terrifying, or can be.
Yeah. No, I totally understand that. Are you a therapist who will laugh or cry with your clients?
This is really interesting because I just saw something about this on Facebook about people crying with their clients. And I was discussing this with another clinician, and, you know, I feel like everyone has a different answer to this. And I was also kind of surprised that everyone had kind of a different answer to this, but I will laugh with my clients. Absolutely. Laughter is so important. I typically do not cry with my clients, and I have kind of a specific reason for this. So I work with trauma. I work with a lot of people who have gone through like awful things that, you know, I wouldn't even discuss specifically with others because I wouldn't, you know, want to even share that with people to also carry with us. And I have heard in my work from clients say that they have gone to therapists and they have cried when they have told their stories of trauma. And then the clinicians, and sometimes I've even heard that those clinicians have asked them not to share details anymore. Right? I know.
What?
I know. And some of the things that I've heard, you know, are objectively terrible. They're awful. They're, you know, no human should have to experience those things. And I feel like I can be incredibly empathetic and hold that space, and I do not need to cry. I also feel like if I am upset about it or whatnot, have my own reaction, like I get to have that, and it's kind of in my time, right? I will say I did tear up one time with someone that I was just so proud that they had like done what they had done.
That's the only time that I like tear up or quote unquote cry. Is like when I feel so proud when somebody like finally gets it, you know, like.
Yeah, I had someone do something. I'm not going to share what it was, but it was just like so powerful to them. And it was so powerful that they had gotten to that space, and we worked together for a really long time. And like, I did well up. I don't know that tears fell, but I feel like that for me, it feels authentic and appropriate. And like, I'm not holding something for them. Right. But I do feel like with trauma, and everyone's allowed to have a different opinion. I'm not saying this is the right opinion, but I think with trauma, oftentimes there is this belief system for many of my clients that like, other people, like it's too much.
Yeah.
And I never want anyone to think that it's too much, because it's not too much. And I want them to share that with me, whatever they need to share. Right. All the details, some of the details, none of the details, and calling it the purple situation, right? Whatever, right? I'm there for that, but it's not about my reaction to their trauma. It's about, So I feel like I have a little bit, maybe a different opinion about that, but maybe it's also like the kind of people I work with. I don't know.
I've gotten all sorts of responses to that question. You know, me personally as a therapist, I do not cry in session. Every once in a while, like I said, if I'm proud of somebody, or if there is like maybe a particularly touching moment, like I might have tears well up. But if somebody's telling me their trauma, I'm not going to sit there and cry.
Yeah. And
because then that becomes about me, you know, and that's not what it's about. And I don't need my client like soothing me, you know, like that's not not the way it works.
Absolutely.
So this kind of
Absolutely.
leads into the next question. How do you define holding space for someone?
That's a really interesting question. I don't necessarily know that I've ever been asked that before, but I think for me, it's creating a safe space and creating a space that is for them. It's not a space that is the same space for everyone, right? And also, I think coming back to that trauma-informed piece, just like creating a space that is consistent and predictable.
Yeah.
Like, I know I have only ever had one client ask me this, but I always wear black, always, like all black. And part of that is in my intention to hold space is that I am not taking up a bunch of space in the room. I'm a human and I'm in the room, and part of that relationship is really important. But I also don't want to have a lot of focus on me. I also used to be a cosmetologist, and where I was trained, we were all black. So it was kind of a habit already that kind of maintained a little bit.
Yeah.
But I do that very intentionally. And I think that for me, it's predictable. People always know kind of like what they're going to get. And I think that's a big part of it, is like this intentionality of, you know, being attuned to your client and what that looks like. And I think part of holding space is also collaborative, right? Like, you know, I've had clients who with EMDR say things like, you know, I'm going to close my eyes, but I don't want to feel like you're staring at me. I don't know that I would have thought about that, right? Because like in therapy, we usually sit across from each other. And so we have decided what that looks like or I have worked with my client to decide what that looks like for them, right? And their space may look different than someone else's space.
Gotcha.
So I think that is how I hold space. I mean, I think that's such an interesting question.
I've never thought about, you know, the clothes that I'm wearing. You know, one thing that I've never done or never liked is having any sort of like coffee table or furniture between me and the client, because, you know, they teach you in school that that place is like a literal, like a block between you, you know.
Absolutely.
But I'd never thought about clothing. That's a really interesting perspective.
And I don't feel that way about like other people. I think, you know, it's not something that I'm like, oh, your clothes are fun. You know, you stand out too much in your therapy room. I think it's also something that just like, it fits for me and it works.
You should see the tracksuit I just bought.
Oh my gosh. What color is it?
It's gold and white with tigers all over it.
Oh my gosh, that's phenomenal. That is fantastic. I will say I have some amazingly fabulous shoes that go with my black outfits though. So, you know, there's still personality there for sure. Most definitely.
I'm curious about the answer to the next question, because it sounds like you've had a lot of really great like supervisors and you know, mentors. So what would you say is the best advice you've ever received from a supervisor?
Okay, so I think there's 3 pieces of advice. The first one was from Dr. Baird, and I don't know if it was like a specific piece of advice, like he said this verbatim, but this is something he definitely taught was, you know, be yourself, because you will not do effective therapy if you are not you. And if that means that like you laugh in therapy or you drop an F-bomb or, you know, you wear all black, like that's you and you're showing up authentically. And if we don't show up authentically in relationships, we can't do good therapy, right?
Oh, I mean, that's the whole reason why I transitioned. I mean, you know, I was a therapist for a few years before I transitioned. And, you know, I realized that if I expect my clients to be open and authentic and honest with me, then I need to be too, you know. I needed to be as authentic as possible, and that's what led to my transition.
Yeah, that is wonderful. And do you feel more yourself now?
Oh yeah, I don't even know how I ever lived before.
Oh. And so now you're living
Oh yeah, no,
your
now it's
life.
great. It's great. And I mean, even though testosterone has caused some male pattern baldness, you know what? I'll take it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing the whole Bruce Willis thing right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Down with it.
Mm-hmm. That's phenomenal. But it
Yeah.
does, it changes your, I mean, I have not gone through a transition, right? And I have the privilege of, being cisgendered. And I can imagine that like living authentically in your whole body is just an amazing experience.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the wildest thing I've ever done. I'm glad I did it. And it's the sort of thing, it changes the entire way you move through the world. Which is very interesting and a whole presentation I could do.
It's so powerful to even hear that. And, I appreciate you even sharing that with me. Right.
Yeah.
You're very open, but, I think that, it's a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, in the past as a therapist, wouldn't have been something that was talked about,
Yes. And is that something that you bring into your work?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, not only do I have a knowledge of what being trans is like, what the processes are, and all the nuances of it, I'll give, we talk about therapeutic self-disclosure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I might disclose something for my transition. Doesn't mean that that person is going to experience that. Like everybody's transition is different, but sometimes it helps give people the language they need to be able to explore what it is for them. Because that was my problem, is I didn't have the language. And that, I had always had the feeling, but I never had the words to put to the feeling. So as soon as I developed that, it was done.
Oh, yeah.
So if my experiences can help somebody else in some way, shape, or form, whether it's in relating, providing information, or exploration, then I'm happy to do it.
Oh, yeah. And that's such
So
a
yeah.
powerful part of our work too, is like, our own experiences.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Not all of them are appropriate for every client, but right. It can be so powerful. And it comes back to that being human in the room.
Right.
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 And that's in that relationship.
Yeah.
Just so foundational.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on all day about this stuff. And in fact, I'll be going on for 2 hours later this afternoon.
That's so exciting.
I know. I'm excited about it. So back to you, because that's what we're here for. What have you personally learned about yourself and or the world through your practice?
So I think what I've learned about the world is I feel like there is a lot of hope. I feel like working with trauma, we do see, a lot of people who feel like there can't be a different way of walking through the world or feeling in the world, right? Like this pain has happened and it's forever. And I feel like through EMDR and seeing like a monumental change and an organic change in the brain, right? And so it's not like we're white knuckling it through these experiences, like trying to make it stick. It's an organic change, and seeing people go from being, various levels of non-functional, right, to being like thriving human beings who are happy and love their lives. For me, like it just gives me so much hope for what's possible.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's what keeps me coming back every day to my job. I love my job. I feel like it's so humbling, and it's such a privilege to be on this part of the journey with people that I think before I saw a lot of pain before I had these tools, right? And you see it and you don't necessarily know, like you can sit and talk with your friend, or you can, create some space for that to be or exist. But like, I feel like through this work, I see a different outcome. I see a different future that's possible for people.
Cool.
And what have I learned about myself?
Yeah.
I didn't know I could sit for this long. I will say that is the hardest part of this job, because anyone who knows me personally knows I'm like an Energizer bunny. I'm just like moving, and I like to move, and I like to be outside. And so that's been really hard. But I will say, honestly, I think the thing that I've learned about myself the most, that has been new, is that I really love like the business side of our work. Like I really... Say that again.
I do too, and all my close therapist friends are probably tired of hearing me talk about it. But
for sure,
but it's kind of a fun part, owning your own business. It's
absolutely
the business too. You're the CEO, COO, and CFO, and I can tell you that the CFO is always an asshole.
That guy. I agree. Yeah, I just think for me, one of my most favorite things to do is talk about EMDR, which is like what we're doing today, right? Like I like talking about EMDR, and I like having that like initial experience and getting people excited about the work, because I know that one of the things that we hear a lot in our profession is like, I called 1,000 therapists and no one's returning my call.
Yeah.
And we have a policy here that we return phone calls within 24 hours. We aspire to do that. I would say 98% of the time we do it. I would say there's occasionally times when we don't, but like talking to that person on the phone, going back to that hope piece, right? Like hearing that, like, okay, maybe something can change, like maybe that part, right? And I love like doing this kind of stuff and talking about EMDR and like the education piece, and going out there and like networking, which I know is not everybody's jam in this field, but like, I like people. I don't know. I just like being around people. That's not to say I don't love therapy, because I absolutely do. That's the best part to me.
Right.
But I just can't believe, I think 3 years ago, I would have told you, like, I don't want to own my own business. I don't want to be the face of anything. I'm terrified of standing in front of people and talking about something. What if they tell me I'm wrong? And now I'm like, you can tell me I'm fucking wrong all day long. I don't, it'll be okay. Like, it's okay. Like, I am wrong. And I tell my clients that all the time. Like, sometimes I'm going to mess up. I'm going to get it wrong. Right. And hopefully the relationship will hold that too. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that business side is fun. It's exciting, and it's very different than our in the trenches, hands-on working with our clients, which I think is fun.
It's necessary. We have to be proficient at it to be able to do what we want to do, which is the therapy, and it's
absolutely.
And they don't teach you that stuff in school.
Oh my gosh. No, they don't.
Yeah.
And I feel like we talk about that a lot in this field about how they don't, but I also wonder, like, with how full our brains are, would that have like absorbed? And
like
maybe
one class, like just one class would have been good.
So we had one teacher who talked a little bit about like overhead and finances and like deciding like how you identify like your salary, which I don't think a lot of people do. As far as like that teaching piece. And I thought that was really helpful. But other than that, I don't think I could have stuffed anything else in my brain. It was full.
You listen to people's awful traumas all day. What do you do to take care of yourself?
I like to hang out with a 5.5-year-old a lot. And I think that for me, that is like a really big shift in reality, right? Because it's like, we're talking about imagination. We're talking about like being excited about the world and all of the pieces all the time. And I think that's a really big part of it for me, is like just trying to be grounded in that when I go home.
It's hard. I can imagine.
It is hard. I will say another thing that I do to take care of myself that has been like, I don't think about it anymore, but comes up a lot with when I talk about like pop culture with people, is I've really shifted the type of like entertainment I consume. So like I, as a general rule, don't consume anything that is like horror or gory or like hurting people or has like realistic themes of anything traumatic, or anything like drama, like interpersonal issues, typically, because that feels to me like I'm consuming entertainment from the pain, real pains that I see every day. And one, I just don't even find it entertaining at all whatsoever anymore. But that's been a big shift for me, like watching things that are, fun or lighthearted or, are more uplifting has been a big shift. I also think that for me, a really big thing is like being outside. So like being with my horse, I like to run. I like to listen to music and dance around like a crazy person who's dancing with a 5.5-year-old. Right. And so I think like, I don't generally outside of work take myself very seriously. Right. And I think for me, that kind of like helps decompress it all.
Totally. Yeah.
And I'm not perfect at that. That sounds really beautiful and well put together. And just any potential clients or anyone who's going through therapy, like we don't have it all together. I don't get it all right.
No. Well,
right?
I mean, that's why we call self-care a practice.
Oh my gosh. And in the pandemic, whew,
yeah,
we've all been fighting an uphill battle there.
Yeah. How would you define happiness?
So you gave me this sheet of questions that you're asking me ahead of time. And like, this was the one that I was like, I have no clue. Like how, like, I don't know. Like, and I don't know if that's like a good thing that I don't know or a bad thing. I think part of it that came up for me was that like, I feel like I'm living the life that I want to live. And so I feel like I don't know how to put a finger on happiness because I feel happy. I feel fulfilled in my work and in my personal life. And like, there's always places to grow, but honestly, I just feel like I'm not searching for that. And I think that's kind of the answer that I came to was like, I don't know because I have it. It's all the things.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say that I'm also really blessed to have the things that I have and that I can say that.
Okay. Well, a couple vulnerable questions here. We got a few questions left. What is the most embarrassing moment you've had as a clinician?
Okay, so I don't know if this is embarrassing, but it is it's a news story and it is my favorite story. So since the pandemic, I have been offering like outside sessions to a few clients who I'm seeing in person. I'm not seeing a lot of clients in person. And we have like a really nice yard at our office and we have some beautiful trees. And I've been doing this for a while. Like, I mean, I even sat out there in some freezing ass cold weather with blankets doing it outside, right? Ooh. So I'm doing a session outside like I do. And I'm doing EMDR with a client and they have their tappers and their headphones on and they're in it and they're experiencing the things and their eyes are closed. And I start getting shit on my birds.
That's awful.
And it just kept going. Like,
oh no.
And at first I was like, what is falling out of the tree? Because it was like blue and black, like blue, like it berries. Looks like someone's like yeah. So I was like, oh, are there berries? And it just kept happening. And this was like at the end of a session. And one of the things in the EMDR that we always say is hold your chair, right? Like you need to you need to hold, like they're in the middle of it, like hold your chair. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm being like pelted with poop. There is poop like on my blanket. There is poop like on my clipboard. There's poop on my little machine. And I'm looking over at my client and they're, deep into this work and they're not getting pooped on. And so I'm like, I'm going to sit here and get pooped on until this session is over.
Oh,
because
my
I'm
goodness.
not interrupting this process.
That's dedication. Good for you.
And the session ended. My client had no idea. And I walked away from the tree. And is literally the funniest thing that I think I've experienced in therapy so far.
That's a new one. Haven't heard that before. That's a good one.
Oh my gosh. It's just like, it's perfect. I mean, it's like, you can't write that shit, literally.
Okay. Well, next vulnerable question. Are you in therapy or have you ever been in therapy?
Yeah, I am in therapy. And I love my therapist. Bless her heart. I think being a therapist is, an interesting dynamic for sure. And an interesting thing that we don't always see a lot. But, as part of our clinical work and as part of our self-work, it's generally recommended that we do go through our own therapy.
Yeah.
And I have been through EMDR therapy and I have been through talk therapy. And I think that that's something that's really important. And I think even if like something's not going on, right, quote unquote, like it's important to be engaged in that, especially as like in trauma work, there's what's called vicarious trauma, which I'm sure that you're aware of.
Yeah.
And what should I explain what that is? I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, vicarious trauma is essentially like hearing about other people's traumas and kind of getting that kind of stuck to you, right? Like it becomes part of your nervous system and experience, even though you haven't experienced it. And it happens a lot with people like therapists and first responders, all different kinds of professions where you're consistently experiencing other people's traumas. And I think that that's a really important part of our field is especially in trauma work, especially in my opinion, of course I'm biased because I work with trauma, but like kind of getting the space to kind of shake that off, make sure that that's not sticking to us, working through it when we feel like we are impacted by something. Otherwise we can't hold space. Like if my nervous system held every single piece and internalized every single thing that I had ever heard,
that'd be awful.
My career would be over right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think I take that very seriously, going to my appointments and yeah, bless my therapist's heart. I think she's wonderful. And I really enjoy working with her. And some therapists do this, but like I have chosen a therapist who is out of our area so that there's no like boundary issues and no issues with dual relationships. It's just something difficult when therapists look for therapists, right?
Yeah, no, I do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that like meme online that says, I asked my therapist who their therapist was and went to see them, asked them the same thing until I got to the final boss therapist and defeated them with my train wreck of a life.
That is fantastic.
Or like one of my previous clients, I'm very open that I'm in therapy and I think it's so important. So we were talking and my client, I think, asked me, I was like, yeah, of course I have a therapist. I think it's really important. And my client was like, so I have a grand therapist?
That is fantastic.
I think I've told that story before on here, but I love it.
That is a great story. Well, yeah, and I mean, like, not that everyone's going to be engaged in therapy all the time, right? Even therapists. But I think if we don't go to therapy or we don't see value in that for ourselves, what does that mean for our clients that there's not value in that for them?
Mm-hmm.
And, there is value. And even for the clients that we work with in like sometimes taking breaks or like maybe not being engaged in therapy weekly or whatever, right? Like life changes, but if we're not doing that work, what does that say about how we feel about our work? Right.
And I mean, I just have concerns about a therapist who's never been in therapy. I mean, I think it's part of like acknowledging and understanding the power dynamics that can come into play or that do come into play is sitting on the other side of the couch, you know?
Yeah.
I think it should be required.
Well, a lot of programs, at least when people are in school, require that as part of the program. I know that wasn't required in my program, but I think it was really helpful.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot of stuff today. Is there anything else that you think would be good for a potential client or other therapists to know about you and your practice?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that I like to emphasize, and like I emphasize a lot now with our business, is that, we have a wonderful group of therapists, and we actually just hired 2 new therapists for our group. Everyone in our group is EMDR trained, right? That's our primary modality for our group. And, a lot of times people will speak with me and they'll want to work with me, which yay me. But I'm also not don't oftentimes have openings for new clients. And so one of the things that I like people to know too is in our group, that education piece with EMDR and continuing education is the foundation of our work here, and making sure that every clinician that works with us provides phenomenal services. And that, as a consultant, as a business owner, as a EMDR therapist, I would stand behind and refer any of my existing clients to anyone on my staff. And and know that their work is going to be very high quality, right? And so I think that that's super important. And our staff, they're phenomenal. They're wonderful therapists, and I feel really blessed that we are adding more therapists to our group. So I think that's the thing that I would say, kind of just knowing that, yes, I'm doing this podcast, which is really wonderful. And I feel really, really blessed to have this opportunity with you, Noah, but we also have a lot of other clinicians who are doing very similar work in our practice, who, even if maybe the F-bombs aren't for you, we have a variety of personalities in our practice.
Good deal. Well, Sarah, it was a real pleasure having you on the show today. And anything you want to leave our listeners on?
I don't think so. I think that was all. I think I left it all on the table. How did that go?
Good.
What do you think?
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure.
The next question. The next question. The next question. The next question.
Thank you for listening to NextQuest podcast. I learned something new today, and I hope you did too. Stay tuned for our episode next week, who will feature Kim Gold, licensed marriage and family therapist, who will be speaking about her practice and area of specialty, eating disorders, body image issues, and compulsive exercise. NextQuest podcast is sponsored by Jan Dimmitt Resources. Save yourself the time and stress of credentialing and let the experts at Jan Dimmitt Resources do what they do best. For over 20 years, Jan Dimmitt Resources has provided administrative support and credentialing services to mental health professionals in Texas and beyond. Visit their website at jandimmitt.com. That is JANDIMMITT.com, or call 512-731-5725 for more information on all the ways they can make running your practice easier for you. NextQuest podcasts rely solely on donations to keep this project going. Please consider becoming a patron on my Patreon page at www.patreon, that's patreon.com/NextQuestPodcast, or you can make a one-time donation on my website at www.nextquestcounseling.com/aboutnextquestpodcast. You can also support the podcast by liking our Facebook page. Until next question, this is Noah Garcia signing off.